Emma woke up in the medical bay of the space station with her head pounding like drums. The ceiling above her was made of a strange metal that glowed with soft blue light. She could hear the sounds of machines beeping and whirring all around her. Her body felt heavy, as if someone had placed weights on every part of her. She tried to move her arms, and they obeyed, though slowly. Pain shot through her shoulders and down her back. She remembered the battle. She remembered the dark ships coming out of the sky like hungry predators. She remembered the way the dragons had roared and the way her rifle had burned so bright that her eyes still ached. A nurse came in through the automatic doors. It was not human. The nurse had skin that looked like polished silver and eyes that glowed amber. She moved smoothly across the floor and checked the machines connected to Emma's body. The nurse did not speak, but Emma could hear a soft humming sound that seemed to come from inside the machine. It was a soothing sound, almost like music. The nurse placed a cool hand on Emma's forehead, and Emma felt some of her pain fade away. The medical technology on this station was far beyond anything Earth had ever created. Emma thought about how she had gotten here. 6 months ago, she had been an ordinary soldier in the human military. She had trained hard and followed orders, but she had never expected to be chosen for an intergalactic mission. The Council had sent 3 scouts to Earth to find the strongest warrior they could find. Those scouts had watched Emma train, had watched her solve problems that seemed impossible, and had watched her show kindness even to those who had hurt her. They had decided that Emma was the one. They had told her that humanity had always been known across the stars as brave and willing to fight for others, even when it seemed hopeless. Emma had said yes because she believed in what they were saying. She believed that her species had something special to offer the universe. Now she was lying in this medical bed, thinking about the elf woman named Lyra. Lyra had been strange and beautiful and terrifying all at once. The elf woman had fought like nothing Emma had ever seen before. She had moved through the air as if she was dancing, not fighting. Her magic had created walls of pure light that shielded the station from the enemy attacks. And her dragons, those amazing dragons, had been like warriors themselves. Ambercrest and Silvermoon had shown no fear as they faced enemies that were 10 times their size. Emma had learned that Lyra was very old. She was almost 5,000 years old, the elf woman had said. In all those years she had seen empires rise and fall. She had seen wars that had destroyed entire star systems. Yet she had fought beside Emma as if they had known each other their whole lives. Emma sat up in the medical bed. The effort made her dizzy, but she pushed through it. She needed to know what had happened after the battle. Had they really won? Were the enemy ships destroyed? What about Zephyra, the alien princess made of living light? Emma remembered seeing her collapse on the floor of the command center. She remembered the fear she had felt that a princess from a powerful realm was dying, because she had used all her power to warn them about the danger coming. The silver nurse made a soft sound, like bells ringing in the distance. Emma understood without words that she should lie back down and rest. But Emma could not rest. She had too many questions. She pulled the sensors off her body and stood up, though her legs shook beneath her. She was wearing a thin white medical gown, so she wrapped a blanket around her body that was lying on the chair next to the bed. Emma walked slowly toward the door. The automatic doors slid open, and she stepped out into the hallway of the station. The hallway was empty and quiet. The lights were dimmed, which made Emma think it was nighttime on the station, though there was no real night here in space. She walked slowly, following the signs that she remembered from her first days on the station. She had memorized the paths to the main areas because she had always liked to know how to escape from any place. It was a skill she had learned as a soldier. Know your exits. Know your way out. But now she was not looking for an exit. She was looking for the command center where she could find information about the battle. Emma made her way through the corridors, her feet padding softly on the metal floor. She passed through several checkpoints, but the security systems recognized her as one of the station's defenders and let her pass without stopping her. As she got closer to the command center, she began to hear voices. She heard many different languages being spoken at once. Some languages sounded like wind in trees. Some sounded like birds singing, and some sounded like animals growling deep in their throats. Emma had learned that the universe was full of beings and cultures that she had never imagined could exist. When she reached the command center, she saw a scene of organized chaos. Large screens showed images of space, and some of those images showed the wreckage of the enemy ships. Relief flooded through her. They had won. The dark ships had been destroyed. Officers and soldiers from a dozen different species were working at their stations, celebrating quietly or checking the damage reports. Emma saw Lyra standing near the center of the room, looking at a large holographic map that floated in the air. The elf woman was no longer in her battle armor. She was wearing simple clothes made of a material that seemed to flow like water. Her long silver hair was tied back and she looked tired but also peaceful. Lyra turned and saw Emma. A smile appeared on her face, a smile so warm and genuine that Emma felt something change inside her. Lyra walked over to her, and Emma noticed that the elf woman moved with less grace than she had during the battle. She too was tired. She too had been hurt. Lyra reached out and took Emma's hand. Her skin was warm and soft, but Emma could feel the strength underneath. Lyra said that Emma should not be out of the medical bay. She should rest and let her body heal. Emma said that she needed to know what had happened. She needed to know that everything was really okay. Lyra led her to a quieter part of the command center, away from the crowds and noise. There, Lyra told her the story of what had happened after Emma had lost consciousness during the final battle. The dragons had continued to fight even after Emma had fallen. Embercrest and Silvermoon had used their strongest magic that they had been saving for 1,000 years. The dragons had created a wave of pure energy that had swept through the remaining enemy ships. The ships had exploded one by one until only silence remained. Zephyra, the alien princess, had not been dying. She had been gathering power to help the dragons in their final attack. When she had recovered, she had thanked Emma for her courage, and she had told her that Emma's actions had changed the course of history. No human had ever fought so bravely in a galactic war before. Word would spread across the stars about the human warrior who had stood against the darkness and had refused to surrender. Emma listened to all of this and felt tears in her eyes. She had been scared during the battle. She had been terrified that she would fail and that all these worlds would die because she had not been strong enough. But she had not let that fear stop her. She had fought anyway, and somehow against all odds they had won. Lyra squeezed her hand gently and told her that this was what made humans special. Not their physical strength, but their ability to face their fears and act anyway. That was the real courage that the universe needed. Emma asked Lyra if they would fight together again. Lyra looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then she said that yes, she believed they would. The dark things that they had fought were just the beginning. There were other threats coming to the galaxy, other dangers that would need to be faced. She hoped that Emma would stay by her side when those dangers came. Emma said that she would, and she meant it with all her heart. For the first time since she had arrived at the space station, Emma felt like she truly belonged in this place. 3 weeks had passed since the battle that had changed everything. Emma had recovered from her injuries much faster than the medical team had expected. The doctors said that human bodies were strange, that they seemed to heal themselves when they believed they had purpose. Emma had spent her days training with Lyra and learning about the dragons. She had spent her nights reading about the different cultures and species that lived among the stars. Embercrest was the larger of the two dragons. His scales were a deep emerald green that seemed to glow when he was angry or happy. He had a tendency to breathe fire even when he was just trying to talk, which had caused several fires in the training chamber. Silvermoon was smaller and more graceful. Her scales were a soft silver color that caught the light like mirrors. She could fly faster than any other creature on the station. When she flew, she left trails of sparkling light behind her that hung in the air for several minutes. Both dragons loved Emma immediately, which surprised no one more than Emma herself. The dragons would follow her everywhere, and they seemed to understand what she wanted before she even asked. Lyra began to teach Emma about ancient magic. Emma had never believed in magic before coming to space. On Earth, magic was something that only appeared in stories and movies. But here on the station, magic was real and powerful. Lyra showed Emma how to feel the energy that flowed through all living things. Emma learned that if she concentrated hard enough, she could sense the tiny vibrations that made up the fabric of reality. It was like learning to see a new color that had always been there, but that her eyes had never been able to perceive before. One day, Lyra took Emma and the dragons to the observation deck. This was a large room on the side of the station that had clear walls. Through these walls, they could see the stars and the vast emptiness of space. Emma stood at the window and felt very small. She had always thought of herself as important, as strong, as someone who mattered. But looking out at the infinite expanse of space, she realized how tiny she was. The station was just a speck of dust floating in an endless ocean. And yet, on this speck of dust, beings from 100 different worlds had come together to build something. They had built a place where peace could be made, where problems could be solved, where different species could learn from each other. Lyra stood beside her and said that this view never stopped being beautiful, no matter how many thousands of years she had lived. Every time she looked out at the stars, she felt grateful that she got to exist in this universe. Emma asked Lyra what had made her decide to become a warrior. She asked why an elf who was so old and so powerful would still want to fight and struggle. Lyra smiled and said that it was because struggle was what gave life meaning. Without challenges, without danger, without the need to protect those you loved, what was the point of living? Lyra told Emma a story about the last great war in the galaxy, a war that had happened 3,000 years ago. In that war, a terrible darkness had spread across many worlds. Lyra had fought in that war for 200 years. She had lost many friends and many of her family members. She had watched worlds burn and civilizations disappear. But in the end, the darkness had been defeated. And from that victory, the current galactic peace had been built. Lyra said that every moment of peace that the galaxy now enjoyed had been paid for, with the sacrifice of warriors who had come before them. Emma and Lyra were just the newest guardians in a long chain of guardians that stretched back through time. Emma asked if that meant they would always have to fight. Would there never be a time when they could just rest? Lyra said that there would be rest, yes. But true rest could only come after the work was done, and there would always be work to do, as long as there were people in the universe who needed protection. The evil forces that had attacked the station 3 weeks ago were just one example of the dangers that existed. There were others, older things that had been waiting in the dark places of space for a long time. Lyra believed that those old things were beginning to wake up. Just as Lyra finished speaking, alarms began to sound throughout the station. Red lights flashed in every corridor. Emma and Lyra looked at each other, and without needing to speak, they knew what this meant. There was danger again. They ran through the corridors toward the command center, with Embercrest and Silvermoon flying behind them. Other soldiers and officers were running too, all heading toward their stations, all preparing for whatever threat was coming. When they reached the command center, they saw Zephyra, the alien princess, standing at the center of the room. Her form was glowing brightly, which meant she was worried or excited or both. She told them that several ships had been detected near the edge of the system. The ships were not responding to any communication attempts. The scanners said that the ships were old, very old, made of materials that did not match any known technology. The commander of the station, a being named Vorath, who was a giant creature made of crystal and light, asked for Emma and Lyra to prepare for another battle. But Lyra shook her head and said that something was wrong. She could feel it. These new ships did not feel the same as the enemy ships from 3 weeks ago. These ships felt ancient and tired, like they had been traveling through space for a very long time. Emma agreed with Lyra. She had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that they needed to be careful. They needed to learn more before they started shooting. Zephyra said that she would attempt to make contact with the ships. She used her energy form to send messages through space, messages that could travel faster than any radio wave. For several minutes, there was silence in the command center. Everyone waited, holding their breath, wondering what would come next. Then Zephyra's form flickered and changed. She turned to face Emma and Lyra and told them something that made their hearts stop. The ships were from the ancient time, from the first age of the galaxy when humans had still been exploring their home planet. The ships were crewed by beings called the Architects, beings that had built the very first space stations and had taught the younger races how to build civilizations. The Architects had disappeared 15,000 years ago, and no one had ever found them. Everyone had assumed they were dead, or had left the galaxy forever. But now they were coming back. The ship sent a message to the station. The message was simple but carried enormous weight. It said that the Architects were returning to see what had become of the galaxy they had helped to create. They were coming to see if their work had been worth anything, and they wanted to meet the ones who had defeated the void creatures. They wanted to meet Emma and Lyra. Emma felt fear run through her body. She did not know if meeting these ancient beings would be a good thing or a bad thing, but she knew that they could not avoid it. The universe had chosen to bring these Architects back now, and that had to mean something. Lyra took Emma's hand again, just as she had done when Emma was recovering in the medical bay. She said that whatever was coming, they would face it together. Emma squeezed Lyra's hand and nodded. The command center erupted into activity as everyone prepared to welcome these mysterious visitors. The screen showed the ancient ships approaching the station slowly and carefully, as if their captains were also afraid of what they would find. The architects arrived in shuttles that looked like they had been built from polished stone and silver. As their ships approached the landing bay of the station, Emma could see beings walking through transparent walls of the shuttles. They were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer between colors. Their faces were long and peaceful, and their eyes were old, so very old. Emma realized that these beings had probably been alive when Earth was still in its early periods, when humans were just beginning to learn how to use fire and build shelters. 3 architects stepped out of the first shuttle. They walked slowly and carefully, as if they were still getting used to the gravity of the station. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, approached Emma and Lyra. This architect had eyes that were the color of deep space, and when he looked at Emma, she felt like he was seeing all the way into her soul. He introduced himself as Keeper, and he said that this was the name he had chosen to carry for the last 10,000 years. The other 2 architects were called Singer and Builder. They bowed respectfully to Emma and Lyra, which was a gesture of honor among many of the ancient civilizations. Keeper told them that the architects had left the galaxy because they had believed that the younger races needed to grow on their own. If the architects had stayed, the younger races would have always looked to them for guidance and protection. They would never have developed their own strength. So the architects had sailed to another part of the universe to see what was there. They had traveled for 15,000 years, and they had seen wonders and horrors beyond description. But eventually they had felt a call to come back home. They had felt something significant happening in the galaxy. When they had returned to the edges of known space, they had heard stories about a human warrior and an elf dragon rider who had fought against the darkness. The stories had reached the ears of the architects through traders and travelers. Keeper said that he had known immediately that they needed to return to the station. He had known that something important was about to happen. Singer stepped forward and added that the architects had also sensed that the darkness was not truly defeated. The void creatures that Emma and Lyra had fought were only scouts, only the smallest pieces of something much larger and much more evil. Emma asked how they could know this. What could possibly be worse than the darkness they had already fought? Keeper was silent for a moment, and then he gestured for them to follow him to a viewing room. Once they were inside, he activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy. But this was not the normal view of the galaxy. This was a view of time itself. Keeper showed them what was coming. In about 200 years, give or take a few decades, something would arrive at the edge of the galaxy. It would be something so vast and so powerful that it would make the void creatures look like insects. It would be the source of all the darkness, all the hunger, all the death that infected the universe. Lyra asked what it was. Keeper said that the architects had no name for it, because there was nothing else like it in existence. It had created the void creatures as tools, as weapons to soften the galaxy and prepare it for its arrival. The only way to stop it would be to build an alliance stronger than any that had existed before. Humans, elves, dragons, all the different species and all the different worlds would need to work together, and somehow Emma and Lyra would need to be at the center of that alliance. Emma felt dizzy. She had thought the battle 3 weeks ago was the end. She had thought that defeating the void creatures meant they were safe, but it turned out they were just at the beginning of something much larger. She asked why they could not just send warning messages to all the worlds and have them prepare defenses. Keeper shook his head slowly. He said that defenses alone would not be enough. What was coming was intelligent and cruel and ancient beyond measure. It would learn from any attack and would adapt to any defense. The only way to truly defeat it would be to face it with courage and with unity. Builder stepped forward and said that the architects could help. They could use their ancient knowledge to create new weapons and new technologies. They could teach the younger races things that had been forgotten. But they could not do it alone. Emma and Lyra would need to travel to the different worlds and help build that alliance. They would need to convince the leaders of each species that this threat was real, and that they all needed to stand together. Singer added something else. She said that Emma and Lyra needed to understand what made them special. She said that she had watched many battles across thousands of years, and she had noticed something. Humans and elves, when they worked together, were capable of incredible things. Humans had something that many of the older races had lost. They had hope. They had the ability to believe that the impossible could happen, and elves had patience and wisdom and magic that went back to the beginning of time. When these two things came together, they created something that was greater than either one alone. Emma asked what would happen to the dragons. Keeper smiled and said that the dragons would be important too. Dragons had their own kind of magic, a magic that was different from elven magic or human magic. When all three types of magic worked together, they could accomplish things that seemed like miracles. Lyra placed a hand on Emma's shoulder and said that she was ready to do whatever needed to be done. She had been waiting her whole life for a purpose this important. Emma nodded and said that she was ready too, though she was also very afraid. Over the next few days, Emma and Lyra met with Keeper and the other architects many times. They learned about the history of the galaxy and the different species that lived in it. They learned about the technology and magic that could be used to build the Alliance. Zephyra joined them in several of these meetings. The alien princess said that her people, the Vex, had strong connections to other civilizations. She could help Emma and Lyra travel between the worlds and introduce them to leaders who would listen. Finally, the day came when Emma, Lyra, the dragons, and Zephyra prepared to leave the station on a ship provided by the architects. The ship was small but incredibly fast, powered by engines that the architects had built. Keeper told Emma that she was the first human to be trusted with this kind of technology. He told her that he believed in her and in what she could accomplish. Singer gave Lyra a gift, a pendant made of star metal that would help her access the ancient magic when she needed it most. Builder gave the dragons a map written in symbols only dragons could read, a map that would show them safe passage through all the known worlds. As the ship lifted off from the station, Emma stood at the window and watched the stars. She thought about how her life had changed in just a few weeks. She had gone from being an ordinary soldier on Earth to being a hero in an intergalactic alliance, and now she was about to go on a journey that would take her to worlds she had never imagined. Lyra stood beside her and the dragons flew around the ship like escorts. Together, they were ready for whatever came next. The first world they visited was called Luminia, a planet of crystal cities and beings of pure energy. The sky was bright even during what the inhabitants called night, and the ground beneath their feet felt warm and alive. Emma and Lyra walked through streets that seemed to be made of frozen light, while Embercrest and Silvermoon flew above them, their movements reflecting off the crystal buildings like dancers in a mirror. The ruler of Luminia was called Starlight, and she was curious about these visitors from other worlds. Emma told Starlight about the darkness that was coming. She spoke about the void creatures and about the even greater threat that was approaching the galaxy. She spoke with passion about how all the worlds needed to stand together or they would fall separately. Lyra added that Emma was correct, and she shared her own ancient knowledge about how such threats had been faced in the past. Starlight listened carefully, and when they had finished, she said that she would speak to her people. She told them that if both a human and an elf, creatures that rarely appeared in this part of the galaxy, were willing to travel and warn them, then the danger must be real and terrible. By the end of their stay on Luminia, Starlight had agreed to send warriors and resources to help build the Alliance. She gave Emma a gift, a cloak made of light itself that would protect her from extreme temperatures and from harmful radiation. She gave Lyra a sword forged from star metal, a blade that would never dull and that could cut through almost anything. She gave the dragons a blessing, a magical spell that would help them fly faster and heal their wounds more quickly. The second world they visited was called Stonehold, a world of mountains and deep caves where beings with skin like rock lived beneath the ground. These creatures, called the Deepborn, were initially suspicious of outsiders. They did not trust beings who lived in the light. But Lyra knew the language of stone and crystal from her ancient days, and she spoke to the Deepborn in their own tongue. She told them that the Deepborn had always been the guardians of the deep places, the protectors of the worlds from threats that came from beneath. This new darkness would threaten the Deepborn as much as any other people. The leader of the Deepborn, a massive creature called Stoneheart, agreed to meet with Emma and Lyra. Emma showed him images that Keeper had given her, images of what was coming. She showed him what the darkness would do to his world, to his people, to the deep caves that his ancestors had carved over millions of years. Stoneheart looked at these images with great sadness. He told Emma that the Deepborn would stand with them. He sent his strongest warriors to help build the alliance. These warriors were small compared to some other beings, but they were incredibly strong and skilled in the use of ancient mining and digging techniques. They could tunnel through almost anything and could create strongholds that no one else could breach. The third world they visited was different from the others. It was called Verdania, a world covered entirely in forests so vast and so thick that they seemed to go on forever. The beings who lived here were plant-like, with bodies made of wood and bark and leaves. They communicated by releasing pollen into the air, and by growing new flowers that carried messages in their colors and patterns. This was a slower form of communication, which made Emma impatient at first, but Lyra taught her to slow down and listen with her heart as well as her ears. The eldest plant being, called Greenroot, had been alive for over 10,000 years. Greenroot told Emma and Lyra that the forest could sense things that other beings could not. The forests had felt the approach of the darkness for many years already. They had felt its hunger and its terrible intention. Greenroot said that the forest would help too. Plants could be used to create medicines that would heal any wound. Plants could be used to create poisons that would stop the enemy. Plants could grow so quickly and so thick that they could create barriers and walls. Greenroot agreed to send the wisdom of the forest to help the alliance. As Emma and Lyra traveled from world to world, they began to see that fear and hope were spreading through the galaxy. Some beings were terrified by the news of what was coming. Others saw it as an opportunity to finally come together and prove that unity was possible. On every world they visited, they found beings willing to join the alliance. Some offered weapons, some offered knowledge. Some offered their bodies as warriors. Some offered their magic or their technology. Slowly, something incredible was being built, but not everything went smoothly. On one world called Shadow Mist, the ruler refused to believe that the danger was real. This ruler, called Darkbringer, said that the stories of an approaching darkness were just lies told to frighten people into giving up their power and their independence. Darkbringer told Emma and Lyra to leave and to never return. Emma felt anger rise inside her, but Lyra put a hand on her shoulder and counseled patience. She said that Darkbringer would eventually understand. When the darkness came and was obvious to everyone, Darkbringer's people would see the truth. As months passed, Emma and Lyra became legend in the galaxy. Stories were told about the human warrior and the elf dragon rider who flew from world to world, asking everyone to join them. Children drew pictures of them. Songs were written about their journey. Emma found this strange because she did not feel like a legend. She felt like an ordinary person who had been put into an extraordinary situation. But Lyra told her that this was what made her a true hero. Heroes did not need to feel special or powerful. They just needed to do what was necessary. Zephyra traveled with them on this journey, and she proved to be invaluable. She could speak to beings that Emma and Lyra could not understand. She could sense when someone was being dishonest and when someone was telling the truth. She could also sense danger before it arrived. Her alien senses picked up things that human or elven senses could not. The three of them became very close during this time, and Zephyra became like a sister to Emma and Lyra. The dragons grew too. Embercrest and Silvermoon learned new magics from the dragons on each world. They learned to create shields of pure energy, to heal wounds by breathing special fire, to communicate across vast distances using dragon song. They became much more powerful than they had been at the beginning of the journey. Finally, after almost a year of traveling, Emma received a message from Keeper on the space station. Keeper told her that it was time to come back. The alliance was ready. The resources had been gathered. The warriors had been trained. Now it was time to prepare the final defenses and to wait for the darkness to arrive. Emma felt both excited and terrified. She had spent so long preparing, and now the real test was about to come. She took a deep breath and told the ship to set course for the station. 2 years had passed since Emma first arrived at the space station. She stood now in the command center, looking at screens that showed the assembled fleet of the Alliance. There were ships from every world, every species, every civilization that had agreed to join their cause. There were fighters piloted by humans and elves and deep-born and plant beings and energy creatures. There were weapons created by scientists and craftspeople who had worked together for the first time in history. There were warriors from 100 different worlds, all standing ready for the battle that was coming. Emma wore armor now that had been created for her specifically. It was a combination of human engineering and elf craftsmanship, strong and flexible at the same time. The armor glowed faintly with magic that would help protect her from the darkness. Lyra stood beside her, wearing her own armor made of star metal, looking as calm and ready as a being who had fought in 1,000 wars could look. Embercrest and Silvermoon were resting in the hangar bay, but they were ready to fly into battle at a moment's notice. Zephyra was communicating with all the different fleets, making sure that every being knew their role in the coming battle. Keeper approached them with news. His old face looked even more weary than it had before, but his eyes were bright with resolve. Keeper told them that the darkness was coming. The scanners had detected it at the edge of the galaxy. It was not one ship or even a fleet of ships. It was a massive entity, something that seemed to bend space and time around itself. It was moving toward the galaxy slowly but steadily, like a predator stalking prey. Keeper estimated that it would arrive in about 5 days. Emma felt fear run through her body again, just as it had during the first battle at the station. She wondered if the fear would ever stop, if she would ever feel truly confident in battle. Lyra seemed to read her thoughts. The elf woman said that fear was natural and good. Fear kept them sharp. Fear reminded them what they were fighting for. What mattered was not whether they were afraid, but whether they acted anyway. The 5 days passed like moments. Emma and Lyra spent their time checking the defenses, talking to the leaders of the different fleets and making sure that every warrior understood what they needed to do. They also spent time together, just talking and remembering how they had gotten here. Emma told Lyra that she was grateful for meeting her. She said that without Lyra, she would have failed a long time ago. Lyra said that gratitude was a human thing, and that it was one of the reasons she loved humans. She said that humans had a way of finding meaning in everything, even in struggle and pain. On the morning that the darkness was supposed to arrive, Emma and Lyra stood on the observation deck. They watched as the edge of the galaxy began to change. The stars seemed to dim. The colors of space began to fade from bright blues and purples to shades of gray and black. And then, something appeared. It was massive beyond comprehension. It was a creature made of pure darkness, a creature that seemed to absorb all light and all hope. Looking at it made Emma feel like she was looking at the end of everything. But then Lyra squeezed her hand and Emma felt strength return to her body. She heard Zephyra's voice through the communication system, telling all the fleets to prepare for battle. She heard Keeper's voice telling the architects to activate their ancient weapons. She heard the voices of leaders from 100 worlds, all telling their warriors to stand strong and fight. Emma ran to the hangar bay where Embercrest and Silvermoon were waiting. She climbed onto Embercrest's back, and Lyra climbed onto Silvermoon. The dragons launched into space, flying faster than they had ever flown before. Behind them came thousands of fighters and warships. Before them came the darkness. The battle was chaos and beauty and terror all mixed together. Emma could see laser, fire and energy blasts being exchanged between the ships. She could see the dragons breathing their special fire at the darkness, creating walls of light that held the creature back. She could see warriors from every species working together, showing no fear, showing no hesitation. The Deepborn had created underground tunnels that went right through the creature, destroying its connection to different parts of itself. The plant beings had grown forests of healing light that protected the wounded. The Vex beings were using their energy forms to fly through the creature and disrupt its ability to think and move. And Emma fought with her rifle and her blade, fighting harder than she had ever fought before. She was not alone. Lyra was beside her, magic flowing from her hands like rivers of pure power. They had become one being in a sense, two parts of a single warrior that was greater than either of them alone. They had become the symbol of the alliance, the proof that different beings could work together and create something wonderful. But the darkness was so vast and so powerful that even with the alliance, they were still losing ground. The creature was pushing further and further into the galaxy. More and more of their warriors were falling. Emma felt despair creeping into her heart. She wondered if they had done all this preparation just to lose anyway. She wondered if they should have given up from the beginning. Then something happened that changed everything. Keeper appeared in his ancient ship, a ship so old that it seemed to be made from the very fabric of space itself. The architect used weapons from the time before time. weapons that had been used to shape the universe in its earliest days. When these weapons hit the creature, it stopped moving. It seemed to shrink, to pull back on itself. And then, Lyra understood something that no one else had understood. The creature was not invincible. It was not unstoppable. It was actually afraid. It was afraid of things that were older than it was. It was afraid of power that it did not understand. Lyra shouted this realization to Emma, and Emma suddenly understood what they needed to do. They needed to show the creature that the Alliance was stronger than the darkness. They needed to show it that beings working together could create power greater than any single thing, no matter how ancient or terrible. Emma called out through the communication system to all the warriors of the Alliance. She told them that they were not fighting because they had to. They were fighting because they chose to. They were fighting because they believed that the universe was worth saving. She told them that together, they were unstoppable. And then, all the warriors from every species and every world joined their power together. They created a wave of pure energy, a combination of weapons and magic and hope that flowed out from their ships and their hearts and their souls. The darkness screamed. The creature that had threatened to destroy everything screamed as the power of the United Alliance washed over it. And then it began to break apart, to dissolve into nothing. The darkness that had traveled across space for millions of years was gone in a moment. When the battle was over, the warriors of the Alliance emerged from their ships and looked at what had been accomplished. The darkness was defeated, the galaxy was safe, and Emma and Lyra realized that they had done more than just win a battle. They had proven that unity was possible. They had shown that beings from 100 different worlds could work together and achieve something beautiful and powerful and good. As Emma and Lyra stood on the observation deck of the station, watching the stars shine bright again, Lyra turned to Emma and asked if Emma remembered the beginning, if Emma remembered when she thought she was just an ordinary soldier who could never do anything special. Emma smiled and said that she remembered. Lyra said that Emma had always been special. She just needed to find the right people to stand beside her, the right cause to fight for. Emma realized that Lyra was right, and she realized that she had found her place in the universe at last.